So, thank you very much for inviting me to give this paper on the prehistory of Sindh. I teach archaeology, prehistoric archaeology at the University of Venice, and I took my PhD from the University of London many years ago, 1981, and then I started to work for an institution we have in Italy, which is called the Institute for the Middle and Far East. So I worked in the certain Oman for 15 years. And from the certain Oman, I was sent the first time to Pakistan, 1986. So it is since 1986. So why, before starting with the slides, why are the Italians involved into the archaeology of Pakistan? We've always been working in Pakistan. Since the 30s, Professor Tucci started to work in northern Pakistan, more precisely in the Sawat Valley. He was very interested in the Gandhara art. He was a Tibetologist and a Buddhistologist. And the Italians had also always been working in the geology of Pakistan. We did very many geological maps of the mountains of Pakistan. So nobody, before that, nobody worked in the southern part of Pakistan, that is the Sindh. In the 80s, we had very many interesting missions. We had a mission, the most important ones were in Iran and in Iraq. Two countries where now we can't work anymore. And we still have somebody working in Afghanistan. So the idea was to work not only in the northern part of Pakistan, that is Sawat Valley, but also in the southern part. And we had, in the 80s, around 1986, 87, 85, 87, the idea was to build up PhD courses at the University campus Sharpeville of Cairo. It was not the university, it was the campus of the Jamshuri University. And we had a cooperation, we were starting a cooperation between Italy and Pakistan, which unfortunately I can't really well didn't work. So we had to withdraw from that program. But we had a mission in Mohenjo-Daro together with the Pakistani Archaeological Service and with the University of Art. So we worked in Mohenjo-Daro together with the Germans and the Pakistanis, and we did some very interesting things. So the Germans were involved into the replanning of Mohenjo-Daro, that is, they took photographs from the air for 3 years and they replaned all the different structures excavated in Mohenjo-Daro, and the Italians did something very, very different. So can we have the light a little bit lower? And then we start with the slides. So, the first slide is a map of Sindh, okay? You know very well where it is. But anyway, the areas where I've been working for more than 20 years now are three main areas. The first one is around Sakka, Rory, and Hyderabad. The second one is very close to Hyderabad. And the third one is the coastline around Karachi, and also just a little bit along the Lasbela coast up to Somyani Bay. So 1, 2, and 3 different areas. Mohenjo-Daro is the most famous archaeological site in Pakistan, especially of Sindh. But the prehistory of Sindh is not only Mohenjo-Daro. There are very, very many other sites which are extremely important. But we start with Mohenjo-Daro because we worked there, and what I did was very, very closely linked with Mohenjo-Daro. It is a very simple view of the city, the most common one, but there are some areas of Mohenjo-Daro which are not so familiar to most of the ordinary people, I mean people who are not strictly connected with archaeology. For example, south of, in the southern part of the city, which is much, much bigger than the city you can see every day, there are some areas which are extremely important. And these areas are the croft activity areas. They are in the southern part. The Italians in the 80s worked for 3 years exactly at these points. What do they look like now? They look like this. What are these? This is like a bazaar. These are shops, one very close to the other. This is a very peculiar area. It's not a residential area. It's not part of the citadel. It is just to the south of the main body of the city, where artisans make specific types of pottery. They make specific goods, for example, beads, necklaces, and whatever. And the Italians did a lot of work in this very peculiar part of the city, which is extremely important. What did they do? Because it was forbidden to excavate the site, they did very accurate surveys, and they just mapped whatever they found on the surface of these craftsman activity areas. You see every small flag, blue, yellow, whatever, is a specific tool, is a bead, is a very small piece of bead, is a piece of flint, whatever, so everything has been mapped in a very, very specific way. And what did they find? You know, Mohenjo-Daro is very famous for the walls, for the priest is very famous for the streets and whatever, for the architecture, but it's not famous for having given to the archaeologists pieces of metal. Metal was very rare. This is very strange because this is a city which belongs to the middle of the 3rd millennium. Why not so much metal? Very simple. Because they didn't use metal that much. What did they use instead of metal? This is what the archaeologists, most of the archaeologists, also the contemporary archaeologists, never mention. They used stone, and this is very strange. They used stone to make the same things the other people did with metal. Knives, cutting things, prepare things for the upper classes and whatever. So these are pieces of flint which were found from the surface of one of these workshop areas. So the point is, where did they come from? Why they were so important? Why in such a civilized system they still used flint instead of metal, instead of copper, instead of something else? Also, these pieces were found just on the top of that small shop I showed you before, where people were cleaning the surface. You see there are two small items on the left, and these are drills. And these drills are very specific tools. They are used for making holes. Making holes of what? Making holes of beads. And these are very typical instruments which were used by the artisans to make necklaces. And these are other tools. You know, you see some very small beads, and you see also some. The 3 beads are positioned just at the top of 2 very small sandstone whorls. So all these tools were used for making beads in a certain way. And this is the final product. So when a visitor goes to the Mohenjo-Daro or Karachi or any other museum, what do they see? They see the beads. But what is the process to make these beads? Beads are very complicated. Beads are a very important thing in archaeology because they involve a lot of actions. The material has to be rescued from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from very, very far away, 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, and whatever. You have to prepare the beads. You need somebody who can make them, and you need a request from the people who want to wear necklaces and who want to have beads of a certain kind, blue, red, and whatever. So these are the final products, and this is what the Italians did in Mohenjo-Daro during the second half of the 80s. Now we move to what my mission started to do together with the Shah Abdul Latif University in 1986. We developed a program of surveys and excavations which continued for until 2002. Where? On the Rory Hills. The Rory Hills are a plateau, are mesas, flat mesas, which elongate for about 45 kilometers from the north to the south, and about 15, 17 kilometers from the east to the west. And they separate two very, very different environments. To the west, you have the fertile plain of the Indus River. And to the east, the situation is geomorphological and environmental situation is completely different. It's a tar desert. Between these two environments, you have the Rory Hills. There are some other features which are very important. To the west, you have the Indus River, and to the east, you have what? You have the Nara Canal. But the Nara Canal is a canal which has been excavated by the British, but which flows across an old riverbed. So the Rory Hills, in fact, in prehistory were between two rivers, the Indus to the left and the Gadar, Saraswati, whatever, to the east, which was much more important than the Indus for the prehistory of the Bronze Age of Sindh and Punjab also. In the northern part of the Rory Hills, you know that there are two cities. One is Sakar, and the other one is Rory. And between the two, there's an island. There are many islands, but anyway, the most important one is the island of Bakar, where Alexander the Great established a fort. And this is what the Indus River looks like when it crosses the gorge between Sakar and Rory. So the Rory Hills, as archaeological sites, are known since the middle of the 90s. A few finds were discovered very close to Rory in 1886 by British officers, and the small surveys were conducted very close to Rory, and then in 1967, 68, the Cambridge Archaeological Mission did some work very close to Rory and also very close to Contigi. But just for a few days, they found a few archaeological sites, flint sites mainly, close to Rory and close to Contigi. They didn't go into the mesas, they didn't explore the area in a systematic way at all. So this is what they look like in the central part, very close to the Shadi Shahid shrine and very close to the tomb of Hoban Shah. They're very desert environment, there are some bushes, not too many. They look very, very flat, but they're very, very corrugated. These are the same areas of the slides before, taken from, this is an aerial photograph of the Pakistani, official Pakistani system. And this is the area around, if you, some of you know the area is very, very close to Shadi Shahid. The Indus River further to the west and further to the north. It is very, very corrugated. But you see that all the rivers, all the old riverbeds flow towards the east and towards the northeast. They don't flow towards the Indus River. The terraces are a little bit oblique. They go this way and not that way. And if you have a very, very close look at the terraces, you can see that on the top of the terraces there are some darker spots. Have a look and you can find them, you can see them. What are these? These are archaeological sites. There are thousands of archaeological sites all over the hills, many thousands. They are very peculiar, they belong to different ages. Most of them out of the third millennium, that is, they are contemporary with the Mohenjo-Daro, but many others are very, very much older. They are Paleolithic, early Paleolithic, and upper Paleolithic. So why are the Rory Hills so important for the archaeology of Sindh? And why are the Rory Hills so important for the archaeology of Mohenjo-Daro? It's very simple. Because these are the most important flint outcrops of Sindh. And this is flint. The brown boulder, which is about 40 centimeters in diameter, is flint. And flint was a material which all the prehistoric people from the early Paleolithic up to the Bronze Age were looking for to make their instruments. So, the Rory Hills were always exploited since at least 500,000 years ago, maybe more, up to the Bronze Age for this reason, because they're full of flint. And the flint, which is of marine origin, flint is ideal for making tools. Any kind of tools. Knives, borers, perforators, whatever you want. And this is what one part of the Rory Hills look like. The top, you see that there's a white environment. The white environment is the natural situation, and the brown one is completely different. There's been an interference by man. What did they do? Men, in a certain period, chipped flint, and they left all these residuals. We have thousands of situations. I'm not joking, not 20 or 50 or whatever. There are thousands and thousands of situations like this on the top of the Rory Hills. We started to discover in 1986. And this is the day we discovered the first archaeological site on the top of the hills near Shadi Shahid. We climbed up one of the terraces because the terrace was not flat, it was waving. So we didn't understand this. Geologist, professor of geology at the University of Milan, and we didn't understand why the surface of the top of the hill was not flat. So there was some interference by man in a certain period. So we went up there and we found flint everywhere. Not only flint, but heaps of flint and heaps of limestone. So man, in the third millennium, as we saw from the artifacts, had done something on the top of the hills, everywhere. What did they do? Look at the difference between the area where this guy is looking at, brown, and the area surrounding it, white. White is limestone, it's natural. All the flats, all the brown spots are flints, shaped by man during the third millennium. And if you have a look at these photographs taken from the balloon from an altitude of some 220 meters, you see what the situation is like on top of those things. You know, you see the difference between the flat region to the right and to the left of the slide and the corrugated situation just in the middle with a lot of white spots. What is a white spot? The white is sand blown from the Thar Desert and which filled depressions made by man. What are these? These are very common in Britain, these are very common in Belgium, they're common also in Italy and whatever. These are flint quarries. Very, very simple. These are quarries excavated, open-air quarries excavated by men into the limestone to find the flint seams and then to excavate it and to exploit it in some way. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of situations like this, not just one, two, or three, which means that during the Bronze Age, during the third millennium, flint was of vital importance for Mohenjo-Daro. Very strange, but they did that. So we excavated just one of those. We excavated it for 4 years, 7 months altogether. We did a lot of work. We were together with the University of Cairo, some 15 people, and we found that the original flint seam was at about 1.5 meters below the present surface. Then the Harappans, that is the people from Mohenjo-Daro, stopped working. They had reached the seam of flint. They took whatever they wanted, and they left everything as it was. It is a very strange situation. Now, this lady is a geomorphologist. She works on the soils, and she is excavating the surface as it was about 3,500 years ago. And this is the surface, this is a quarry. You see on top, it's very clear in the section. There is about a thickness of about 20 centimeters and 40 centimeters of sand. This is sand which is blown from the Thar Desert, and below that there is the debris of the material which was excavated by the Harappan warriors. And then if you go down, you reach the bottom of the quarry. And in the bottom of the quarry you see very, very many holes. What are the holes? The holes are natural, but they've been widened because from the holes these people took the flint nodules. And they left everything as it was. This is a marvelous archaeological situation, because it is like, for example, until the day before they were working at the quarry, the day after they didn't go back there. Why? And this happens very many times in the archaeology of any country of the world. It's a beautiful situation because everything was left there exactly in situ as it was during the Bronze Age in the Rory Hills. And this is the case of one of the holes. You see it is the front of the quarry. There's a hole on the right side, and inside the hole there was a nodule of flint. They wanted this flint, and this flint was necessary for making beads, for making very, very many other things which were of vital importance for the city of Mohenjo-Daro, which had very, very little, for some reasons, exploited very, very little metal. And these are the tools which are very typical for the Harappan period. The Harappan artisans were very, very clever. They used the pressure technique, which is very, very difficult, and they chipped the flint in a very specific way. They detached very, very narrow bladelets, and from the narrow bladelets they made perforators, borers, and through these they were capable to make beads. So it's a long process which involves a lot of thought. And then they transported, maybe this way or other ways, to the river, the flint, and from the river to Mohenjo-Daro and all the other cities of the Indus Valley. Not only Mohenjo-Daro, but the flint from the Rory Hills went down to the Karachi coast and up to Harappa, and then also to Afghanistan. So there is a movement of this flint which is very important to understand how people moved the commercial and trade activities of these people during the third millennium. So this is what we did in the Rory Hills for many years, but the point is now is that the Rory Hills are being destroyed by modern quarries. During the last 20 years they did a lot of work at the industrial level, so many of the archaeological sites have been destroyed and many others are vanishing, including some extremely important Buddhist sites, not only the third millennium ones. So apart from the Bronze Age sites, we found also evidences, clear evidences of activity during the early Paleolithic. These two guys, the lady is a geomorphologist, the other one is a technician, flint technician. They are preparing the excavation of the early Paleolithic site, which is at least 200,000 years old, where all the stuff you can see is perfectly in situ. It's never been removed, as it was left, maybe it moved 5 centimeters or whatever because of the rain, nothing else. So all the stuff you have on the Rory Hills, on the top of the Rory Hills, is still perfectly in situ, as it was left through the ages. And this is the map of the excavation we did. And this is the material we found. Very, very typical. These are bifacial tools, which are some 15, 20 centimeters big. They're very common all over India. They're not so common in Pakistan at all, because nobody found them before. And it's only Miss Solchin found some here on the Rory Hills, but nowhere else. And they're very common also in the western part of Iran, anywhere, from Southeast Asia to Central Europe, Western Europe. The hand axes indicate the presence of men during the early Paleolithic. So the first people made this kind of tools. That is what they look like. This is a finished example of a hand axe. After excavating the flint quarries of the Bronze Age, and after working on the Paleolithic of the Rory Hills, we moved to the southeast of the hills themselves, because the environment was very promising for finding archaeological sites also in the Thar Desert. Why? Because that part of the Thar Desert is very, very rich in lakes, lake basins. And these lake basins, which are now salty, they were not salty until the Bronze Age. We have very good pollen cores from the Indian lakes, which are of the Thar Desert, which indicate very clearly that the environment changed during the Bronze Age, around 2,500 years before Christ, or 2,000 years before Christ. So we moved to the region around Tari, and we did archaeological surveys on the top of the dunes around the lakes, and we investigated the surroundings of 5 lakes. The environment is like this. It's extremely interesting. It is very, I think many of you know the region, the geography of this area, but it's very, very important for one simple reason. All the dunes are stabilized. It is not a desert which is similar to the Sahara or any African desert or whatever. It is a vegetated desert. There is vegetation everywhere. And if you move further to the south, and that is around east of Mirbukash, whatever, the vegetation increases. So the dunes are stabilized, they are fixed. The dunes are where they were until when? The situation was exactly the same 10,000 years ago. Why? Because we have archaeological sites on the top of the dunes. Because the vegetation started to grow in that region around 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago. We are sure of that. I don't mean that the vegetation was exactly identical, but I mean there was vegetation on the top of the dunes, which stabilized, fixed the dunes, so the dunes are not mobile. Here's one of the lakes, is Sindh, and this is what one of the tops of the dunes look like. This is an archaeological site. On the top of the dunes, which you can see is vegetated, there are Mesolithic traces of occupation. Mesolithic is a period which indicates the presence of the last hunter-gatherers. Mesolithic is a period which started about 12,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, and it marks the beginning of the Holocene, which is the geological period we are living now. And this is another lake. It's called Bir Nago, and all around these lakes, but not along the shore of the lakes, but on the top of the dunes, we have archaeological sites. And most of the sites are Mesolithic, which means that the last hunter-gatherers which inhabited Sindh lived on the top of the dunes during their movements. These are mobile people, they're not stabilized people. They moved from one side to another one, and wherever they stopped, they left some traces of their activities. And the traces are very, very easy to recognize. I'll show you a couple of slides. They are the same everywhere, in India, in Pakistan, in Portugal, in Germany, or in Italy, or in Scotland, or wherever you have traces of the last hunter-gatherers. They are very, very, very similar to each other. The situation southeast of the Rory Hills is like this. You have the lake basins, which are indicated with the spot area to the left, and then the dunes, okay? On the top of the dunes you see the small triangles. The triangles represent the occurrence of archaeological sites. And then we did a radiocarbon date. You know what the radiocarbon date, when all the organic material can be dated with a very specific method, and you can have an idea more or less precise. It's a mathematical way of behaving, of the age of the material which is dated. And where the dot is located, we found some mollusks, and we dated the mollusks, indicated that around the period 0, Jesus Christ, the lake was a little bit above the present level. So there is very simple scheme which gives you an idea of what the situation of the archaeological sites is like in that region. On the top of the dunes you have the Mesolithic, the water level which is a little bit lower now than it was 2,000 years ago, and the water level, the water which is now salty, and it was not salty until about 4,000 years ago. And these are the artifacts. They're very typical. They are geometric shape, they are trapezoidal or triangular, and all this flint comes from the Rory Hills. People, the last hunter-gatherers went to the Rory Hills, exploited the flint, and they used it to chip the artifacts, also during this period. So we have at least 4 main periods of exploitation of the Rory Hills flint: early Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Bronze Age. So after working in the Rory Hills 4 years ago, thanks to the help of Mirato Talpo and his cousins at the Jamshur University, we moved to another site which is extremely important, which has been forgotten to the archaeologists for the last 20 years. It was called Milestone 101, but the real name is Ungar. It's very, very close to Hyderabad. It's about 20 kilometers south of Hyderabad. And here, where until the 60s or the 70s, all the situation was perfectly in situ, also here the quarrying destroyed most of the archaeological sites. And there were surely very, very many, undoubtedly very many, of the early Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic, and also of the Bronze Age. This is a very old early Paleolithic workshop. You see some flints in a C-shaped position. And these are early Paleolithic finds which are now in the collections of the Institute of Geology of Karachi University. Very typical bifacial tools. And this is another thing which is very important. You know that in Europe, most of Europe, and also in most of Central Asia, during the Middle Paleolithic lived a human being which is very different from us, that is the Neanderthal man. Neanderthal disappeared in Central Europe and in Asia around 35,000 years ago. They disappeared from Crimea in Ukraine, present-day Ukraine, around 20,000 years ago, and in Spain around 30,000 years ago. But the point is, we know nothing about the southeastern boundary of the distribution of the Neanderthals. That is, we know nothing about Iran, we know nothing about Pakistan, we know nothing about India. And these are extremely typical artifacts of the Neanderthal man. Only the Neanderthals could make flints, could make tools like this. And this comes from Ungar. So in Ungar, maybe around 40,000 years ago, 35,000 years ago, there were Neanderthals. And this is another point which is extremely important, because in India there are very, very many Middle Paleolithic sites, but none of this indicates the occurrence of Neanderthal people. So I think that the boundary of the maximum distribution, southeasternmost distribution of the Neanderthal was the Indus River. And Upper Paleolithic, from the top of this is still in situ, I left it where I found it in February this year, together with Mir Farooq Talpur. This is a peak which belongs to the late Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic, might be 30,000 years ago, something like that. And indicates, it's very simple, this indicates the spread of human beings like us, modern humans. They started to spread around 35,000 years ago and very, very quickly moved to Southeast Asia from the region now, Lebanon, Palestine, and so on. And another thing which is very important, also at Ungar, we found traces of exploitation, flint exploitation during the Bronze Age. You see, this hill is very peculiar. It has 3 canals. This is one of the canals. These are areas which have been excavated. These are flint quarries. And last year it rained very much. It seems that we have all the area which is yellowish now because it's grass. But anyway, on the top of these hills there are traces of quarrying flint, which means around these sites there must be a city or a village or whatever of the built up by the Harappans, that is by the Bronze Age people, like the Mohenjo-daro ones. So after Sakka, Rori, Jaipur and Unga, we moved down to the coast around Karachi. What is known of the archaeology of Karachi? The area around Karachi, from Karachi to the Hub River and from Karachi to Reri along the coast, is full of sites everywhere. There are dozens and dozens, and they belong to different ages. Also, the Karachi University campus is full of archaeological sites. Just in front of it, if you move across the University Road and you move to the south of the Karachi University campus, there is a hill which is now filled with buildings or whatever, which until 20 years ago was full of archaeological sites. These are the Mulri Hills. You cross the road, Karachi University Road, on the university campus, you go on the top of the hill, and all over there were lots of archaeological sites which belonged mainly to the Mesolithic period. Why? It's very simple. Also in this case, this hill is full of water. There are springs everywhere, and the Mesolithic people settled very, very close to water springs. Wherever there was a water spring, there was an archaeological site which belonged to the Mesolithic. And this was not known. We knew nothing about the Mesolithic of Pakistan until 10 years ago. Nothing at all. India was full of archaeological sites of this age. Nothing in Pakistan. Why? Because people couldn't recognize them. Very simple. And it is full. So I think if you move, for example, if you move to the Kadeji Gorge, also the Kadeji Gorge is full of archaeological sites of the Mesolithic. It is the same for Reri, along the coast. For Reri, the creek, which is now a beautiful mangrove swamp, the creek is surrounded by sites of the Mesolithic period everywhere. And these are the finds. The finds are simple to recognize. These are tools of geometrical shape. These are lunates. But we have also trapezes. And the trapezes, wherever you go in Europe and you find a tool like this, Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, wherever, it means that this tool belongs to the Mesolithic. The Mesolithic is people made up tools for hunting which were identical wherever they moved. From Pakistan, India, to Portugal and to Morocco, they are all the same, not identical, but extremely similar. These are trapezoidal arrowheads. These are arrowheads which were used for keeping harpoons to go hunting. And this is from Langeji. There are many sites, dozens and dozens of sites, which have never been published. I started to publish just a few things 3 years ago. I did more than 3,000 drawings of this stuff. They are very, very typical for the Mesolithic. Mesolithic lasted about 3,000, 3,500 years. We have a complete sequence of the Mesolithic period in this region, which is ideal for Mesolithic settling. And this is one of the sites. We are very close to that's Balochistan. The Hub River is about 5 or 6 or 10 kilometers to the west, and this site is called the Mile 12. There's a very, very small spring. Around the spring there is a Mesolithic site. And this is a very typical situation. Also along the River Hub, there are archaeological sites, which are extremely important and interesting, also in the civilization sites, Mesolithic and whatever you want. And these are the very, very last 4 slides, because these slides were not taken in Sindh, but across the River Hub, which is so important, as I told you. I moved when visiting the Lansbila coast, and very, very close to Gadani. I think you know where it is. Very close to Gadani. Gadani is a very, very important archaeological area for the exploitation of jasper. Gadani is a promontory which is red. And this red stuff is jasper, which was exploited by prehistoric people during the Mesolithic and during the Bronze Age. But before Gadani, about 10 kilometers to the south, there's a very, very small bay which is called Daun, and along the Bay of Daun is full of prehistoric sites, which are very peculiar for Pakistan because they've never been discovered before. What are these? If you look at the slide, you see that just in the middle of the slide there is a white spot, a little bit elongated. That is an archaeological site. It's a heap of shells. These sites are called shell middens. Shell middens were discovered in the 80s, very beginning of the 90s for the first time in Denmark. Denmark is full of shell middens, but all the world is full of shell middens. The Americas are full of shell middens, also here in the Bay of Mexico, around New Orleans, whatever. And the Sultanate of Oman have been working with shell middens for more than 10 years. And the shell middens are residual of the activities carried out by collectors and fishers. If you know about Aryans, for example, if you know of the retreat of Nearchus and Alexander the Great along the Lasbela coast and then to Makran and then to Iran, it is very, very well described what the situation was like about 2,000 years ago. That was a land inhabited by the fish eaters. And these are the remains of the fish eaters. Shells and fish everywhere. And they reflect something. If you have shell midden along the coast, it means there is something else behind, inside. If you move 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers or whatever, you can find inland archaeological sites of the same age which are totally different. Because people move to the sea during a certain period for collecting shells, for eating, or for fishing, or for doing some kind of activities which were related to the marine environment. So that is a huge shell middens. We found 12 shell middens just in 2 days. It is full. We radiocarbon dated them, and the oldest one is Neolithic, and then the others belong to different ages, also to the Bronze Age. But they reflect. They are extremely important also from an environmental point of view. You know, the Karachi is, if you go to the, very close to the harbor, very close to the port, there's beautiful mangrove swamp, okay? And the shrubs are Avicennia marina shrubs. And from an archaeological point of view, the mangrove swamps are very, very easy to recognize because they are full of this species of shell, Terebrania palustris. And Terebrania palustris is very, very typical. Wherever you go to Arabia, to India, to Pakistan, everywhere. If there was a mangrove swamp in the past, the mangrove swamp the presence of the mangrove swamp is indicated by remains of Terebrania palustris. It's very typical, very easy to recognize. And this is a shell midden with two. There's one very, very close to the trowel. To the left of the trowel there's a quirl, because people here during the 7th millennium cracked the shells, and these are Terebrania palustris shells. This is another shell midden. You see there is a tomb over here, and behind the tomb there is a small spot of shells, and that is another shell midden which is of the Bronze Age. And another one here, huge one, a heap of shells, these are Terebrania palustris shells. So this is what we did during the last 20 years. So most of the work was carried out in the Rory Hills, and then we moved slowly down to Ungar, and then to Karachi and to the Lasbela coast. So what I'm doing now is cooperating with the Institute of Sindhology, which helps us quite a lot in the research of Ungar, and we are expecting to work at Amri or to another site which is very important, is the Taro Hills, and vital importance was the help of Mira Tatalpur and his cousins. So, and the researchers were sponsored by my university, Ca' Foscari University, Venice, by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Mira Tatalgo and the University of Junction helped us quite a lot, especially during the last 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We are starting
Lights,
question
could you
answer
put on the
session.
light?
Yeah. We are starting question answer session. If anybody has questions, since we have a little bit more time, we can raise the hand and you can ask questions to Doctor. Anybody has any questions right now?